Okay, so my name is Stefan Engblom. I come from Finland. It's a bit cold there right now, so it's kind of nice to be here in very warm San Francisco. I work at Supercell as a game designer, and I've now worked in the Clash Royale team for roughly 1 year. I joined the team really soon after the global launch, but I had the privilege to follow the development very closely as I was working at Supercell in other teams, and I played very actively in all the internal playables. And we are a small team. There's a photo of the team, current developer team. So we're 16, and I'm the only one with the title game designer there. But we're really everybody is very much involved in all kinds of different aspects of design there. So everybody is kind of a designer. And we are super independent, just like other teams at Supercell, and basically all the decisions regarding Clash Royale, the game itself, is done by this group. So it's cool. My main areas that I work on is card balancing, the game's economy, and system design. So that gives me a pretty holistic view on and a holistic take on the whole game. But I, of course, run all decisions by the team, and we discuss everything very openly. But yeah, in this talk, I will focus on card balancing, which is perhaps the part that I'm most passionate about, and I feel that it's also the one that I've learned most about during this past year. So let's get going. So I'm going to talk about a few topics here. So first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about Clash Royale, what is Clash Royale, introduce the game a little bit, and talk about some things like how we do the upgrade levels and how we handle the balancing there. It's kind of like a background information for the rest of the talk. Then I'm going to talk about our goals for balancing, why do we do it, and what are our thoughts, and define some terms here. Then I'll talk about some of the key principles we have when we think about balancing, what kind of things do we think about there, and then how do we decide which cards we then rebalance, what are the things we think about and take into account there. So let's get started. Clash Royale. First of all, how many here have played Clash Royale? Okay, quite a few. Nice. How many have not played Clash Royale? Okay, there's a few. It's a free game. It's you should try it. It's pretty nice. So, all right. So, well, anyways, Clash Royale. So it's a real-time PvP game, and it has roots in collectible card games and MOBAs. But it's a bit of a mix of those genres and then tailored for mobile. And in Clash Royale, you collect cards, upgrade them, you build a deck of 8 cards, and then you go to battle against random players around the world. And it's real-time PvP. You generate this resource called Elixir during the course of the game, and then you use it to cast cards on the play field and to rotate your deck at the same time. And you have 3 minutes plus 1 minute of overtime to try and destroy all the enemy towers. And usually pretty much 30 seconds into the game, there's already total mayhem and chaos on the field. And the units, they move and act by themselves when you deploy them, and there's still plenty of decision making to do with things like timing the placement and managing the elixir, optimizing the deck cycle, defending, counter pushing, etc. Something I want to talk about is the stats we have in the card, or the cards basically. They actually have quite a lot of stats. The knight is a very vanilla, very basic card in the game, and even that has quite a lot of attributes. So I'd like to think of these compare the cards in a way a little bit more to let's say League of Legends heroes than let's say Hearthstone cards. There's way more parameters that you can tweak and that affect it. And so even a vanilla card has that many things, not to talk about then a more complex card like Electro Wizard that shoots multiple targets, stuns them, and when you deploy it, it does a zap effect and so forth. So from balancing perspective, it's of course nice that there's lots of these parameters that you can tweak. You can do a really small thing like adjust a little bit of hit speed here or movement there, and it can tweak it just a little bit, the card. But one thing that's like tricky there is that like it actually makes it a bit more challenging to like mathematically balance the cards to like figure out like this is like a good spot for it compared to, let's say, Magic the Gathering, where you have like mana cost, attack, and defense, and that's basically it for a vanilla card. So it's a bit trickier, and of course also to not make it too easy, we have then the upgrade levels and the different rarities. So I want to like use a few minutes to explain how we do that, like how we handle that thing. So I'll start with the commons. So commons, there's 13 levels of commons, right? And for each level, when you upgrade it, we give exactly 10% damage and 10% hit points more. But we don't adjust any other stats. We don't adjust hit speed, we don't adjust movement speed or radius or anything like that. Because this, when we touch only these values, we ensure that the interactions between the cards actually remain the same from when they are like at the same level. So as an example, archers, and one archer would two-shot one goblin at level 1. And at level 13, the interaction is exactly the same, but the damage and hit points are just higher. So this helps keep me sane when like it's... So how do we handle then the different rarities? It's actually like kind of simple. We start at a higher level, but then we upgrade them like in the same method, like 10% each. So basically rares, a level 1 rare has the value of a like level 3 common. And an epic starts at level 6, and a level 1 legendary is basically like a level 9 common. And then the place, and what we have there is this thing we call the tournament cap. That's a card cap level that we use in tournaments and also in friendly matches in the game. We actually like not only cap cards there, but we even level up cards to that cap. And that is the spot where we balance the cards. So when I make like values for a new legendary card, I balance it, kind of compare it to like the level 9 commons and see from there. So this ensures that the interactions remain the same at all equivalent levels. And then like it basically ensures that like at max level, if everything is at max level, then we have the same balance that we have at the tournament level. And then like we think of the level differences there, then like more of a bit of a spice to the game, or something you can like specialize in things and so forth, so that it's like a kind of a spice thing. But the main thing is to balance it there. And something to note also that I want to mention is that between rarities, it's not meant to be like more powerful as such. It's the idea is that like the more rare the card is, the more exotic mechanics we introduce and the more advanced mechanics. So as I had like earlier, the Knight, very vanilla card, it's a common, and then we have Electro Wizard with like all kinds of crazy abilities, and it's a legendary. So that's the idea. And the same applies to like when we go like upwards in arenas, like the abilities get a bit more complicated. It's also cool for like kind of introducing the cards gradually and introducing mechanics gradually for the players. All right, so that was the basics. So let's jump to like the actual topics. So let's talk about the goals of balancing. So, yeah, wait, I need some more. Okay, it's usually quite good to figure out like why you're doing something and then think about the goals of what you're doing. So then you kind of have something to aim for. So for balancing, I would say it's fun to have fun and interesting gameplay. Also include kind of like have depth and so forth. And then have variety, so that there's a variety of different play styles and different deck archetypes that are viable. And then the game feels fresh, both with like new cards, making the game feel fresh, but also that like in between games you have like surprising moments and stuff like that. So the game feels fresh. And if I would have to like sum this in one sentence, it would be that you want to have like a healthy metagame. So that's like the ultimate goal in the quest for the healthy metagame, right? So let's define what this healthy metagame really now means. So let's start with metagame. So First of all, metagame is not exactly a dictionary term, and I didn't find anywhere like a proper definition for it. And it can mean many things. Even like game developers seem to talk about it like with different meanings. But players of like PvP games and developers of PvP games, when they talk about balancing, they usually like metagame is kind of an established term. And for the purpose of this talk now, metagame means the cards, combinations, and strategies that the community at large have found most effective. So the metagame is not something that the developers create as such, and unfortunately very rarely even predict perfectly, but balancing is then the tool that we can use to kind of steer it in directions that we want. But like, yeah, as a player and a developer, I actually find the concept of metagame like quite intriguing and interesting. I feel it's kind of like the idea that like, you know, we are the toy makers and we create toys, but we don't really know what the kids will figure out to do with them. And usually it's something like totally different that we invented. But that's also like exciting. So that's metagame. All right. So what's like then healthy metagame and an unhealthy metagame? So you could think of it as like being a state of fun, variety, and freshness. And to kind of cover the total extremes, let's first look at what would be like a broken metagame. It's not like a realistic state, but like a broken metagame would be where you have like nothing. It's like, yeah, it's broken. So an example would be like this type of card, you know, like you just instantly win the game by playing it. It doesn't make any sense, but like, I mean, there's no strategy, there's no interaction, there's no variety, it's just stupid. But this is really not like a realistic state. If you think about it, like, I mean, already common sense like says that you can't make a card like that. So what's then like a perfect metagame, which is kind of like as unrealistic. So that would be like everything is in perfect balance, everything is in seamless harmony, everybody loves everything in the game, and like everything is just like absolutely fantastic. Like it's not really like, it's kind of utopia. It's nice to kind of maybe strive there and think about it and dream about it, but like we need to be kind of honest with ourselves that like people have different tastes and like is that like, so yeah, we can't really reach it. So instead we have something in between. So we have like unhealthy and healthy metagames. So they might be a bit tilted, like the unhealthy state might be a bit tilted, you know, you maybe have like only 2 viable play styles, there's not so much variety, maybe it's like kind of fun for a while. And a healthy one is like there's several things that are going on, like, but like, you know, it might be like maybe less varied, but it's like really fun or something. And one way to look at this is kind of like think of it kind of as a diet. So it's kind of like, you know, it's nice for a week in GDC, but you know, you kind of like, yeah, you know that it's not good for you in the long run, and you will kind of feel bad afterwards. Or then the healthy one is like, that's where you wanna be, and you know that like it feels good like in the long run to be there, but yeah. So, all right, this slide kind of looks like we're talking about something completely different here. All right. So that's the definition of unhealthy and healthy metagames. So then let's talk about some of the key principles we have for balancing. So first, this is how we do it. That's basically it. Any questions? No, just kidding. So make everything overpowered, or well, make everything feel overpowered to be more precise. So let me illustrate this a little bit. So let's take like chess, for example. I mean, it's an archetype of a very balanced game, right? And a game that would only have chess soldiers duking it out, that would be like extremely balanced. Like it couldn't be more balanced. But to be honest, like it doesn't sound to me that much fun and exciting. But overpowered, like that's kind of like the Marvel Avengers. So certainly they're like all overpowered, and we could argue about who's more overpowered than the other. But they all have their unique traits, their unique moments when they are like the best and kind of balanced in a way between each other. So the concept of making everything feel overpowered is about making everything fun and exciting. And this has, of course, a lot to do also with character design and art style. but that's not the topic now. So how do you, with game balancing, make everything feel like overpowered? So how would you make these superheroes, or in Clash Royale's case, how would you make all the cards feel overpowered? So an alternative way to say this is like each card needs its moment. So there needs to be some purpose for the card, or more technically, there needs to be enough situations where the card can bring huge positive value, right? And you could then switch out here like the card to heroes, spells, characters, whatever the game has. So an example from Clash Royale of a card that's like feels overpowered is Pekka. She's this like giant robotic warrior thingy that deals insane amount of damage to a single target and can take like a lot of punches. So like she can really feel overpowered in those moments when she's like smashing through some really powerful unit and then still going for like a big counter push. And if she reaches the tower, she can like easily with a few swings take it down. So Pekka is super overpowered, everything is good, but unfortunately everything needs a counter. Too bad for Pekka. And for Pekka there are actually plenty. So in fact she's considered by top players to be one of the weaker cards in the game because she's so easy to distract and counter with actually very low value cards. But that's actually like the thing. That's what keeps her in check, and that's what makes gameplay interesting and allows the metagame to evolve. So you have these counters to cards, but you also have then counters to the counters, etc., etc. So the metagame evolves, and this is basically what makes everything that feels overpowered to not actually be overpowered. And another thing that's good with having multiple counters is that it acts as a safety net. And yeah, there's this pretty recent card, Elite Barbarians. Like if there are players who have played it, so you might know what happened. So it's two very fast and strong barbarians, and they are like extremely devastating when left alone. But when it was released, it was actually like very, very weak, like kind of the weakest card in the game, and it was met with a lot of disappointment. That's from the forums. Yeah, my bad for the value. Sorry, really. So a few weeks later, we buffed it. But it was a bit too much, and my bad again. So sorry also for players if they watch the video, whatever. So I definitely learned some lessons there, and it was really very powerful indeed. And for a few weeks we had a pretty like action-packed gameplay when they were like smashing through all the towers. But the good things is that the tools to counter it existed in the game, and players did use them, and players did figure out them. So having counters for everything acts as a safety net. So it's not an excuse to make bad balancing, but I do think that it's inevitable that mistakes, happen. So so having a safety net there, having multiple counters, can turn this like disaster into perhaps a little tilted and unhealthy metagame. All right. So make everything feel overpowered, but everything also needs a counter. And something I have to say here, though, is that these two principles were heavily inspired by Blizzard. So Blizzard's approach to multiplayer game design, as presented back in GDC 2008 by Rob Pardo, was really inspirational talk. And in general, like Blizzard's games have really been and can continue to be a great inspiration at Supercell. So yeah, kind of wanted to say that don't take my word for it, like for the stuff that I mentioned. So yeah, you can find actually this talk online still, at least the audio of it. So it's worth checking out. All right, so make everything feel OP, but everything needs a counter. So let's move on. So a little bit about new cards and old cards. So something that's important to us is to make new cards meaningful. Because if the goals of balancing are to offer fun, variety, and freshness, then it's going to make sense that you have to make the new card meaningful. If the new card is not used, it doesn't meet any of these criteria. So you're going to have to make it meaningful enough so that it's used. And something that I want to bring up here is that we often get these comments and speculations about how new cards are overpowered, so we just monetize them then. But like the thing is that that's not true. There are of course places where we think about monetization, obviously, but card balancing is just like it's not one of them. And I honestly think that it's hurtful both in the short run, but especially in the long run, if you have monetization as like an actual goal for balancing, because it's just like it contradicts with the other goals, with the actual goals. So yeah, just wanted to clear that out. So making new cards is meaningful. Making new cards meaningful is important, so they actually have an impact on the game. So you could say we aim to make new cards balanced, but we kind of round up a little bit. Hopefully not like elite barbarians up a little bit, but like, you know. But an important part in making new cards meaningful is to try to fill a gameplay gap. So maybe there's some spell or units that's missing, or something needs like alternatives or counters. So just to make sure that the new card clearly has its own spot and isn't just like a strictly better version of some old card in the game. So as an example, I could mention the Ice Spirit. It's a single, one elixir unit that sacrifices itself, deals a bit of damage, and then freezes the building and units that it hits. And the idea kind of came from having an alternative to the one elixir skeleton, which was the only one elixir card at that time. And Zap was and still is like a very versatile card in the game, so that stuns the enemy. So this was kind of also meant as an alternative to Zap. And then we had, prior to this update, we had released the Fire Spirits, and it was kind of a cool mechanic where they sacrifice themselves and explode kind of like as a fireball. So we thought that we could utilize that same mechanic and do like a more chill version of the Fire Spirits. So having a purpose for each card is important, and it also ties to our strategy of keeping the total card count reasonable. And it's also important for us because it's also important for us to keep old cards relevant, though. So like the iconic Baby Dragon and Mini Pekka. So we do rebalancing of old cards to keep them relevant and in the changing metagame. And whenever we do that, we aim to stay true to the soul of the card. So essentially that means that we try to avoid these complete reworks of the cards, and instead we do smaller changes like to the basic stats. This also makes it a bit easier to predict, because a complete rework is essentially like making a new card. But another thing that is important is that like when there are a lot of players playing the card, so this way it kind of plays like it played before. So while we communicate about the changes quite a lot, like not everybody reads it, so it's nice if the players can still play it the same way. They can deploy it on the same spot and like play it very similarly. So it feels familiar. So make new cards meaningful, but keep old cards relevant. And then something we decided very early on is that we want to keep on rebalancing. We want to do regular, semi-regular like balance changes. We've been doing like balance changes roughly once per month. And there's no exact science to this cadence. It just felt like that was when the metagame felt like it was kind of getting a bit stale. So and there was like this feel of like that we could have like a little bit of change. So we chose the 1 month cadence. And at the beginning, the reactions were a bit negative maybe towards the balance changes. But over time, as we just kept on doing them because we felt that it was important for the game, players started to like actually appreciate them, and they started to like look forward to them as well. So it was a good thing. But there's also like the metagame really needs also time to evolve by itself. So you kind of need to find the sweet spot for your game. Like how do you want to approach this? And an extreme of like not giving it enough time is that players might start to take it as a crutch, like that instead of like figuring out like counters to the current meta decks and so forth, they actually like just roll their thumbs and wait you to do like a balance change. So it becomes like a balancing act of like being a crutch and then like managing the frustration of the players when you're not addressing imbalances. And something that we noticed when doing these different kinds of changes is that like buffs are we learned that buffs are nicer than nerfs, and it's quite natural. It makes sense because nerfs tend to hit cards that are used a lot and that are very powerful. So there are a lot of players who get a bit disappointed, and so it's not something that we want to do lightheartedly, but we of course do it when it's needed, and it makes more sense to like nerf one card than to buff like 69. So, and buffs, on the other hand, they hit cards that not that many use. So those who use them are, of course, super happy. And those who don't, like, they might be happy that there's a new card coming into the meta, maybe, or then they just feel indifferent because they don't have to deal with that card usually. So balance changes are always complex things. So communication is very important. So it's not just about like informing players that, hey, this is the change we did, but it really helps with managing expectations, because the buffs are never. We never intend buffs to like make the card the most used card in the game. Likewise with nerfs, we never mean to kill the card. It's still supposed to be relevant. It's still supposed to be used, but just like kind of be slightly weaker and be in a better place. So when communicating, it's a good spot to give like reasons, background, and some context to why the balance changes were made. We always make this in-game post about the changes, and then we have in our blog a bit more like context and a bit bigger, longer descriptions. And then also, like, what helps a lot is that there's a very active community of YouTubers, streamers, and so forth that are doing like even more like in-depth views of the changes and all the ramifications, all the indirect changes, etc. So keep on balancing regularly, knowing that buffs are nicer than nerfs. So that's basically like these key principles. So next up is to talk about how we decide which cards to rebalance. All right, so there's 70 cards in the game right now, but it doesn't really make sense to like tamper with all of them at once. Obviously, it's too big of a change. And the ramifications it becomes impossible to predict. So how do we decide then? I think it like boils down to like 3 parts. We listen to the players, and then we utilize data. But at the end of the day, it really boils down to these two can't really make the decision for you. So in the end, it boils down to intuition and just like knowing your game. All right. So let's talk about listening to players a little bit. So feedback and analysis from players plays a very big role. We're very, very fortunate that we have a big and very passionate and active community. And many of the best players from all over the world are actively writing strategy articles, analyzing the cards, analyzing the metagame. So the community and the players can't, well, they can't like make that decision for you. It's like an invaluable tool for like, that you should listen to. And by following the community, you really can get like this pulse on the players' feelings. You have to look sometimes a little bit between the lines, like what's actually the root of the problem there, because complaints about a certain card, the balance for a certain card might not actually be like that specific card is imbalanced, but it might be that there's just like lack of variation, for example, rather than you would need to like nerf that specific card. And one thing that's worth realizing is that like especially after a game has matured, the developers are really not the world's best players, like definitely not. And the players can really teach you about your game. And so like embrace this, swallow your pride, stay humble. There's a lot to learn from the players, and I have an example of this where this like kind of for the first time really struck on us. So there's this YouTuber. I think this was the video that kind of made him famous, though. Jan from Orange Juice, and back in April last year, the game was like 1 month old. He made this video about how to use the 1 elixir skeletons, and the team watched this video. And we were a bit surprised at what all things you can do with that only 1 elixir and with that skeleton. And Yeah, like at that moment we really learned quite a lot. Like not just about the skeletons. A lot of players learned about the skeletons at that point. We had to nerf it after a couple of weeks. But we also learned a lot about the game and about the fact that how much depth there actually is in this game, and the fact that like players really can and will teach you about your game. So that was like a valuable lesson learned there. We still have these moments every now and then, like with some videos that we watch. Oh, this is how you play this game. And something that's also related to listening to the players is that the top players are the trendsetters in the game. So, I mean, they have access to all the cards. They tend to experiment, they craft the new decks to outwit their opponents and gain the edge. And quite often the trends then slowly trickle downwards. Another example where this concretely like dawned on us was when we had our first live tournament. So that was also in April 2016, so that was a nice month for learnings. We had this invitational tournament in Helsinki, and there was this young Finnish guy called Jason who ended up getting to the finals, and then he beat everybody on stage 3-0, including some like of that were like top players in the game. And he was using this deck that like no one else had ever like tried, and it immediately got dubbed to the Jason deck. It was a pretty basic deck really, and only contained like common and rare cards. He played it really well, and after the tournament we really got to see for first time the effects of like esports and this concept of top players being trendsetters. When we saw like how the deck use rate went up. So yeah, people saw the tournament and people definitely like tried out the deck, and it helped that it was like only using like very basic cards. That was quite cool to see. So listen to the players, but to get a second opinion, you can also like check out data and you can like, use it to verify stuff. So for us, using data means mostly looking at use rates and win rates, and a bit definition time again. So for I suppose use rate can mean different things for different companies and different games, but what we track is percent of battles where the player owned the card and used it, and win rate is percent of battles where the player used this card and won. So we look at these metrics both at individual cards level and also for full decks. So what do players use and what do they win with basically? So what we read out of these metrics then. So first thing to mention is that use rate is the main metric we use. And the thing is that it really tells directly about like what is the state of the metagame, right? And if the goal is to have a healthy metagame, then it makes sense that use rate is the one that shows you how you're doing with that. So when looking at use rates at different arenas, you kind of get a feel of what the players see in the game. And you can then back this up like with what the community is talking about. And maybe some of the comments are actually that you see in the forums might be actually coming from just a certain trophy range where like a card might be overused or so forth and so forth. So use rate is a pretty good indicator, and it's also something that I think it's a good indicator of something being like overpowered or underpowered, because like very strong cards also tend to be used quite a lot. But win rates, they tell stories too. So it can, for example, be a good indicator of sleeper cards or high skill cards. Like this type of cards that not that many use, but those who do, those who specialize in them, can be winning like consistently with them. So it might not be a good idea to not like buff that kind of card like too much. Depends. And win rates, though, as well as use rates, they also heavily are affected by the current meta game. So obviously, like if some good card is used a lot, the counters might get used a lot and so forth, and the counters might be good for winning games and so forth. So, and I want to mention here now that like these are not necessarily the best metrics for some other game. Like you really need to like figure out, understand your own game and figure out what you want to achieve using the metrics. So I think, for example, a game like Hearthstone, I think it would be very useful to look at things like win rates across different classes to get the different classes balanced between each other. And in a 1v1 fighting game like Street Fighter, I'm sure they track the win rates between different matchups with different heroes, or characters. So that's something that you have to figure out for your own game. So when we look at these metrics, we look at like different arenas, different trophy ranges, and from the top players, and also from the challenges, which is the in-game tournament system, which is played like with tournament capped cards. And when it comes to like evaluating the balance and like for individual cards, we really mostly look at the top players and the top challenge players, because they have access to all the cards, they know how to use them, and they are kind of the trendsetters, as I mentioned before. So I think that's a good place to start. But we look at also like lower arenas, if like what do players see there, like do we that we don't mess up like their game too much. So what is then a good use rate? We have in the game currently 70 cards, and it's 8 cards per deck, so that makes roughly 9.4 billion different permutations, which is nice. We don't have quite yet enough players to like fill that, but we'll try. We'll try to get there. So if everything would be used perfectly evenly, it would make for an average use rate of 11.4. But that doesn't make much sense, does it? Like we can't expect all cards and all combinations to be used evenly, and it can't be the goal either. Like a deck with only the most expensive cards in the games, it won't win you many games. I see a gentleman here is changing his deck right now. So, right. So how do you figure out then like what's a good use rate? That really then boils down to like knowing your game. So when we look at the use rates then and ponder like ponder about them, we might think like, okay, why is a card popular? So why is it used so much? So like maybe it is like very powerful. Probably is. But it could also be that it's just a very, very good counter in that current metagame. Or maybe it's just like an extreme versatile card like the Zap. It's a cheap, versatile card that fits almost every deck. So it makes sense that it has a higher use rate. And another way to look at this is think like of kind of target use rates. So for example, you might look at different main attack cards. They should be viable alternatives to each other, right? Like cheaper ones fit more decks for sure, but ideally they are all viable and they are kind of like you can look at them and compare them to each other. Or direct damage spells, maybe like an even easier example, that they have their own twists and situations, but they should be really like viable alternatives to each other. So these are all quite objective ways to look at the use rates and think about what is a good use rate and how does it look. But then there's also like a more subjective way to look at it, which I call spiciness. So there might be these cards that are good spice to the game, but we don't want them to be used too much. We don't want them, like they're just there for variety. So if we first look at like kind of bread and butter cards, we would have the iconic Barbarians. It's an iconic common vanilla staple card that can be considered for most decks, and it's fine if it's used like quite a lot, especially like if the meta is such that it's a good counter there. And then there's like spicy cards, and the X-Bow is an example of that. So it's this building that rapidly fires arrows at a huge range and can reach the enemy tower from the other side of the river. So it's very powerful when it's played well, but we deliberately actually don't want it to be among the most used cards in the game. And this is something we learned during the beta, because there it was quite powerful, and it was used by almost everybody. And the community, and in the end also we, felt that it fit more as a spice to the game, rather than this main strategy used by most players. But spice is important. Spicy cards are important. They add a lot of variety, keep the game fun, keep the game fresh. So I think you should have these type of cards as well. And I think like metrics-wise or data-wise, a good way to recognize a healthy spicy card is that it has like a low use rate, but a pretty high win rate. So that means that there are these highly skilled and specialized players that are using it and win with it, but it's not really seen in every match. Nexbo is, for example, a card that like it has a super low use rate at lower levels. It's quite hard to use well, but actually top players every now and then like it tends to like become quite used quite a lot actually, and in some tournaments, in some esports events, we can see might see that like quite many of the players on stage are actually using Expo. So I think it's in a fairly okay place at the moment. So you need to understand these things, and you need to be able to look at the cards and the game from very different points of view. And it's also actually important to like understand advanced concepts of the game. So especially if you're the person actually doing the balancing, like I think you really need to understand how the game works. Sure, you will be learning all the time from players and by playing yourself, but you need to understand what the top players, for example, are talking about. So in Clash Royale, like there's plenty of these things. Like you have like the elixir advantage, the concept of defending and counter pushing, multi-lane pushing, a bit more advanced stuff like knowing all the card interactions or what different deck archetype exists and how they work, what kind of opening moves there are, identifying the deck cycle, breaking the deck cycle, understanding what's spell baiting and building decks around spell baiting, kiting troops, the pros and cons of having the flying attribute in a card, because it's not always good, and the pros and cons of having like slow units, fast units, very fast units. You need to understand these kind of things. The point is not to like now go through and explain all these. The point is that you need to know your game, right? So play your game a lot, both during development and release. It's really important. And this was something like during the development of Clash Royale, it was played a lot. And as we saw with the Orange Juice's video thing, we didn't like figure out all the things. But it was played a lot in the company, and even there, like kind of players outside, people outside the team were like coming up with good strategies, teaching kind of the team about like all kinds of stuff. So it's really important. Like play a lot, both during development and then after release. So to figure out which cards to rebalance, we listen to our players, we learn from them, we utilize data, but in the end, you're the one who has to make the decision. So it boils down to like understanding the game and intuition. So that's basically the topics covered. But the quest for the healthy metagame, it continues. So we have healthier, we have unhealthier metagames, but with a persistent game that's meant to last for years, it's really a never-ending process. I mean, new cards are added, new game modes are added even, and the player base matures, the players learn more, and we learn more and more. So the eternal quest just continues. So I feel that there was like a bunch of things now in this presentation, but I still feel like that I only like really scratched the surface of things regarding gameplay balancing. So here's some a little selection of talks and articles and videos that I've personally found very useful and inspirational. Some expand on these concepts that I talked about, and some are about like other interesting concepts about around like game balancing, things like power creep, counterplay. So I really recommend checking these out if you're interested in this and if you're doing this stuff. So yeah, you can take a photo. I'll have a little pause before I go to the next slide. All right. So just to recap the things from this presentation. So the goals of balancing are to offer fun, variety, and freshness, which feeds to a healthy metagame. And some of the key principles we use are making everything feel overpowered, but having counters for everything, and making new cards meaningful, but keeping old cards relevant, and keeping on rebalancing, knowing that buffs are nicer than nerfs. And to decide what to balance, listen to your players, utilize data, but at the end of the day, just play the game and know your game. All right. I'll leave this here, and we can have a little Q&A. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Hi.
Yeah. Hi.
Fantastic talk.
Thank you so much.
Everything about it. Came in a little late. I wasn't sure if you had mentioned this, but how big is your balancing team? Is it just you? Is it like 6 people?
It's me.
Really?
So yeah, the Clash Royale team is in total 16 persons. So that's like all the developers and the QA guy, the community manager, data analyst, and so forth. So yeah, okay. I'm the only one.
But all the card ideas come from the whole team?
Yeah. And also balancing, we bounce around the ideas with the whole team and like.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hey.
Thank you for the talk. Thank you for flying away from the cold to come visit us down here. When you were doing the internal balancing, and I know you joined the team after it launched, was there, were you testing out all the different levels, or were you using kind of the tournament level as your model that you would then build off of afterwards?
Both. So there were plenty of tests where we started from scratch, and I started from like 0, and also at the same time tested the progress and the economy and the first few days, first 7 days. We also had like a 30-day like company playable where everybody was duking it out. So there you got like kind of the different levels. But then we also had these tests where everybody had like this same like equivalent level cards, and like we're playing this kind of like more like esportsy things.
And the goals of those different tests were to either test the metagame, which is why you kind of tested the progression, and that's why you were testing the progression progress, and then the goal of the balance tests was more just figuring out if you actually had a competitive game.
Yeah, you could say that. I think there was though like also for the balancing between the troops, also like with the kind of the meta progress and stuff like that. So it was also to test those, like how do the early cards work, and how does it work when you like early on get an epic card that's actually like kind of a level 6 card in a way compared to the commons that might be like at level 4 and so forth. That it all works out.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello. Will it make sense to show real-time metrics publicly to the users?
Maybe. I think one tricky thing might be that like it might tilt the like metagame even more. So if there's like cards that are used a lot, then they get used even more and so forth. But there could be some stuff to show. I don't know. Yeah.
Thanks.
Nice idea.
So piggybacking onto that a little bit, how transparent are you with the players about the balancing that you're doing, and how do you, as kind of a community question, how do you manage their expectations and keep them from? There's a little bit of reluctance to mess with the stats too much because people get upset. How do you balance all that? And do you use communication to do that?
I'd like to think that we are quite transparent about it. But yeah, I do feel also that we could do a better job at like explaining and like kind of explaining this kind of stuff, like what are our goals with the balancing and what do we think about when we do the balancing. So it might be sometimes feel like kind of a very shallow, like our explanations maybe.
Do you explicitly expose the stat changes on a website or anything, or just people find out about it by playing the game?
No. I mean, we post like we put always before we do the stat change, we post them like in the inbox, and we post them in our blog with explanations why we did it.
Cool.
And then also like we do some cooperation also with some influencers that they get kind of access to the information and they can do videos about it perhaps, and some of course do like this proactively, so they go more in depth in things, like they might talk about like the ramifications and their own opinions about it and so forth.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you.
So in recent months, you guys have increased your release cadence of new cards. Has that affected your process in any way? What are some of the challenges there? Yeah, it's become like infinitely more stressful. So we initially, like in the beginning, when we released our first card, we released them always like 6 cards at a time, 4 cards at a time and so forth. But it was in November that we decided to go that let's release like 1 card every 2 weeks. And it had many good attributes, like people got to focus on that 1 card.
at the time it wasn't like a huge amount of cards, and also like kept the game fresh. But it was actually quite challenging for me because we had to like kind of think about the balance of like new cards that we were then developing before even seeing what the old cards were doing to the game. We had to do like balance changes in between when there was like only 1 week or 2 weeks to the next card being released, and we don't know what it will do to the game. So it has definitely like added challenges, and we are actually now changing. We announced it already that we are changing that cadence, like partly because of this actually, like to like be like 3 to 4 weeks.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
So this will kind of piggyback off that question, then I have a small follow-up afterwards. But so you mentioned that while conceptualizing cards, you made sure that every card had a specific scenario it provided utility for. So every card has its moment, right? So do you think that there would be a point that every like niche utility would be filled, or do you think that the release of new cards, it creates like new utility, like new niches for there to be utility for? And do you think that like you could pretty much have an endless amount of cards, or do you think there's a point where every scenario has its niche card, I guess?
Yeah. So yeah, it is like challenging to always like more and more challenging to come up with like new uses for the cards and to again fill like a new gap and find a new utility. We still have a bunch of ideas, of course, and something we discussed like regarding the like kind of how many cards fit in the game, how many cards does it make sense. That's something we talk about a lot, but we don't have. It's not yet in any way a problem, and we don't have like. We're kind of not there, but it's something we talk about.
Right. And then something else. So with the Clash of Clans, like Supercell is also one of their amazingly successful games. There has been just like a huge kind of subculture of the industry that just focus on like cloning that game, basically. What do you think of like the current sub-industry, I guess, of Clash Royale clans and the success of those? And how do you see that industry like growing in the close future, I guess?
So you mean like, what do I think about kind of clones and like copying?
I guess, yeah. Just
okay.
Briefly.
Well, I mean, like totally blatant clones, let's say, that you like seriously like just copy like the whole code base and stuff like that, and that I think is a bit like disrespectful. And
right.
but like I don't seriously. I think like most games are not really clones. They really. I think most games like try to find their own thing. Like they are heavily inspired, might be like by a game, and they take it. And I think it's more almost flattering. And I like this genre, and I'm happy to try out these new games.
Yeah,
and
it's cool that you guys pioneered a whole new genre of game. But thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi. So when a card is either overpowered or underpowered, sometimes that's because the numbers just need to go up or down a little bit, but other times it's because it's what it qualitatively does is either not healthy or too weak or something. What kind of factors do you use to determine whether you should be adjusting the numbers on a card versus adjusting what it does?
So what's the question? Like, kind of, how do I decide like which stats to kind of change in a card, right?
Right.
Was that the question? It really depends on the cards and the situation. I don't think there's like any one rule. Kind of like looking at like for example, just trying to like so that it's staying true to the soul of the card that I mentioned, like that I don't like make a fast unit slow or make a like fast hitting unit too slow and so forth. But like kind of looking at what makes sense, which is the moment or the place where this card is like too weak or too powerful, where that needs kind of tweaking. Is it that it doesn't do much damage? Does it have like a hurtful interaction with some card, like that it one-shots something that maybe it shouldn't one-shot and so forth. So it really depends on the situation.
I mean, I guess the thing that I was specifically referring to is cases where, if you think back a while ago when Elixir Collector was steadily, the HP was dropped, the HP was dropped, the HP was dropped, and then eventually you decided, actually, we need to change the cost and the Elixir generation rate at some point. And then the card was in a healthier place after that. What prompted that kind of change of approach?
there's not really like, I don't know, we just discuss kind of like different things and like what would make sense, and maybe also like sometimes there might be good suggestions also in the community about like that this could be like tweaked in this direction. But I don't know. There's not really like any process for that.
Thank you.
Sorry, I can't answer that better.
Hi.
Hello.
Here. You have a mana system that is based on time in your game. I'm very curious how you decide if a card needs to cost 5, 6, or 7. Can you answer that, please?
Yeah. So when we kind of do new cards, one thing that then like quite early comes up is like at which elixir cost should we try to kind of get this card? What is kind of an elixir cost that maybe we want to get like a new card there, or it would be cool to make this card into like a 7 elixir card, and then we try to kind of balance the stats accordingly. So there's again like not really like any strict process to this. Like it's just like flying. Sometimes it's like we start with a card like this could be cool as a 7 elixir card, but then like things maybe like the artists create like a cool character, and then it's like okay, this doesn't anymore make sense as something tanky, so maybe we need to like change this into something else. And so I don't know. Doesn't really like.
My question was regarding to if I play a card that costs 7, I have to wait another X seconds to cast another card. Do you take in consideration this fact?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So that ties kind of into the like how the like the elixir works and the deck cycle. So like it's kind of a trying to think like how to go there shortly. Like in a way, like let's say like in Magic the Gathering or Hearthstone, you have this or Magic the Gathering. There's this concept called the Jedi curve, where you have like kind of like that a 1 elixir card or a 1 mana card should be 1/1, a 2 mana card should be 2/2. This is the thing you're talking about, right? Like, so how do we define like what is the stats of kind of a 3 elixir cards? And that's the thing that's like it's kind of mathematically a bit like trickier to define because there are all these parameters like affecting it. So we kind of compare to the existing cards that okay, the other 3 elixir cards or the other 4 elixir cards have these kind of stats. So maybe it should be like in this place, maybe it's like a bit weaker with damage than compared to Mini Pekka at 4 elixir, or maybe it has a bit more hit points and so forth.
Okay, thank you, man.
Yep, thank you.
Hi. When you launch a new card, you have this fantastic pie with data from players' feedback and actual data from them. So what happens before that? When and how do you decide to launch a new card? It all boils down to intuition alone, or what sort of data do you gather before? Because you don't have the players' data yet, so it's all team data internal, or you use external play testing for a new card?
So, so what's the question now? That like.
What's the process you follow to decide that the card is ready and in a well shape, ready to launch in the game?
So when a new card is ready and we want to release it? Well, I mean, we kind of have set a deadline for the release for the next version. So we try to get the card ready by that time, I guess. But that's not really what you're asking, I suppose. But I'm like trying to wrap my head around like the actual question maybe.
How you arrange how do you get the data to tell that a card is ready to be launched? What's the trigger point?
We don't really like get any data for a new card when we're making a card, if that's what you mean.
So just intuition based?
Yeah, so we put it out and then we see how players use it like this. We just test it internally and try to figure it out. I think we're running out of time. So have to wrap this up. There's actually there's this wrap-up room. I see there's like, you at least have some questions, maybe others have. Like, I'm gonna go to this wrap-up room. It's right across. I think it's overlook 2022. Am I right? I don't know. So I'm gonna go there. If people wanna come there and ask more questions, they're welcome to do so. Okay, thank you very much.